This is Grant Page, professional stuntman, holder of a record for the world's first tandem rope slide. Carrying the weight of 26 stone by your fingers down a 400-foot rope and dropping off at precisely the right point takes more than raw courage. It requires a kind of muscular development and bodily coordination that Grant has made his specialty.
It particularly needed coordination with the eyes. There was 26 stone. I was coming down fairly fast and fairly high from the water, and the entry point into the water had to be exact. The Zodiac only had a small area to work in, and there was a lot of bad undertows there as well.
To Grant Page, life is a continual learning process, a progression of challenges and experiences. When the Kung Fu movie craze started sweeping the world, he noticed certain innovations in the way the martial artists manipulated certain muscle groups to achieve their purpose. Chinese Kung Fu has a lot to offer a Westerner interested in biomechanics and physical education, so Grant Page decided to go to Hong Kong, home of the martial arts, and meet the Kung Fu killers. Before going to Hong Kong to compare notes and ultimately match fists with a genuine Chinese martial artist, Grant Page went and looked at a lot of Kung Fu movies. The late Bruce Lee must rank as the greatest martial artist of modern times. His personal charisma and his brilliantly inventive style are directly responsible for the current popularity of Kung Fu. Here he is fighting Chuck Norris, 7 times world karate champion. Bruce's quest for realism often demanded that he actually be hit, and hit hard. And these fellas don't play around. After absorbing some celluloid theory, Grant felt ready for some elementary practical. For this, he went to one of Australia's top martial artists, Lawrence Lee.
Lawrence, what are the sort of things they're going to throw at me in Hong Kong?
Well, the first possible counter they'll do to you would be a simple direct block and then a counter, which is the most primitive of all the three stages of progress.
Just from a straight Western style
Yes.
throw.
For example.
We'll just try it? Right. Yeah. That's pretty effective. Well, there was one thing strange. You blocked from that side and took the punch across your face instead of away.
Basically for two reasons. Point one, we're trying to get on the blind side of the opponent and tie his hand up the other hand. Point two, if we were to block from this inside, we would cop the other punch while coming in, like that. See? So we have to think ahead of what's going on.
What else would I strike?
Well, now, second one is much more sophisticated in content. Mainly simultaneous block and counter. If you were to chuck a punch at me...
The same thing again?
Yes. This would be more or less hitting at the same time and blocking.
Yeah.
This would save one space of a block and then a counter. The first one is a pretty primitive type of block and counter technique, which we threw away when we were very small.
Yeah.
Now, the third one would be very simple, but sophisticated in its simplicity. I will show you.
From the same thing again.
This is called evasive action plus counter. Now, if you were to give me a similar punch, they will probably encounter it this way.
My wife won't like you.
Lawrence has some 200 pupils under his wing and holds classes 7 nights a week. The martial arts have been in existence for thousands of years. In the East, they are part of everyone's standard education. In the West, until recently, they've been practiced in clubs by small groups of enthusiastic people. The general public, with typical Western xenophobia, tended to think of karate as merely the ability to break bricks, and the martial arts as some insidious form of Oriental thuggery. But in 1972, with President Nixon's visit to China, things Chinese became respectable. It was only a matter of time before some aspect of Chinese culture would capture the fascination of the world.
In our style of combat, we use two different types of mental attitudes of fighting. The first one being the indifferent attitude, the second one being the emotional attitude of fighting. Now, in the indifferent attitude of fighting, we do not accept the existence of the opponent. As far as we are concerned, all we are doing is just being there and doing our techniques perfect. And in doing so, in not registering that the opponent is there, our limbs would travel further and penetrate much more into the opponent rather than accepting his existence and therefore put an automatic subconscious block to it. We, in our indifferent attitude of fighting, do not have any time for fear. There is no emotion involved, mainly a pure objective type of attitude. No time for pain, no time for fear. It's just a blank look. Instead of viewing at the opponent, we view just slightly away from the opponent so as to catch the overall picture of the whole form. In the emotional attitude of fighting, the main thing we do there is to go animal over an opponent. Mainly, we use, you may say, a type of self-hypnosis using keywords. Our keywords which we employ is 2 minutes, meaning in 2 minutes we should have downed the opponent. Another important thing is that in the emotional attitude of fighting, what happens is we conjure up a picture, a story, that this man right in front of you has slaughtered your parents, your father, mother, and everybody, and you're just going to get him and you're going to get all out, go animal, and go right stuck into him. We do what you call sound as to block out our own fears, pains, emotions, and everything. Now from here, I will just give you an idea of what it's like.
Self-defense is just one of the benefits Kung Fu has to offer its students. Lawrence Lee even teaches it to blind people to heighten their perception. A light Kung Fu kick can function as an extension of the eyes when feeling for obstacles. Showing them how to block a punch, Lawrence is, in fact, teaching them to sense the vibrations given off by an approaching moving object. A sightless person can build up valuable confidence through knowledge of the abilities his body still holds in store. Lawrence has a simple, basic philosophy. Nothing is impossible for a determined man. Bruce Lee is obviously the spiritual father of Lawrence's style, and his own ability to defend himself with Lee's methods are quite apparent from a demonstration he turned on at his local wine bar. If someone suffering from an overdose of Clockwork Orange starts to get heavy, here's what to do, Chinese style. Lawrence generally moves like lightning. Here, he deliberately slows down his techniques for the benefit of the cameras. The Queensberry rules nominate certain parts of the body as the target and outlaws the use of the feet. Chinese boxing acknowledges no such restrictions. Anything goes if you want to win.
Well, here are a few things you can dish out to them when you're in Hong Kong. The first one I'll show you would just be a side kick with a back cross from the back leg.
Yeah.
It goes like this. Get your distance right, like with back kick.
That's pretty effective.
Works most of the time, yes.
How did your back leg come across? That seemed to slide across.
You sort of slide across so
Yeah.
as to lower your center of gravity, and then from here, take off and kick.
Could I try one?
Yeah, sure.
I hope I'm as accurate as you are. From about this distance, this would be about the normal distance. Right.
Quite good.
All right. More toe.
A kick like that is enough to wind an attacker and makes him think twice about continuing. One of the basic principles of Kung Fu is to deter rather than fight, to check rather than hurt, and to hurt rather than kill. Grant was soon to find out a lot more about the martial arts when he reached Hong Kong. Grant Page jetted into Hong Kong on a quiet Sunday morning. He soon found that to appreciate the true nature of Kung Fu, it is important to understand a little about the people, the culture, and the environment that gave birth to this violent but strangely beautiful art. It is hard for a Westerner to realize that behind the politely attentive faces of every Chinese he comes across, there is a national character forged by thousands of years of banditry and civil war.
Come on, kill the Jack!
Throughout their history, self-defense has gone hand in hand with self-improvement, and ruthless, brutal vengeance is perfectly excusable in the name of family honor. Before work every morning, countless thousands go through the ritual motions of kung fu training. The Chinese are by no means a nation of waiters. In Hong Kong, the tourist sees all the picturesque imagery that the travelogues have prepared him for. But, like most big cities, it's an uptight town underneath. At the bottoms up, a high-class topless bar in the heart of Kowloon that caters for residents as well as tourists. Grant talked with the hostesses about the pressures of Hong Kong life.
Is it hard to get a job in Hong Kong?
It depends on what sort of job you want to get, and also it depends on what your qualification is. Supposing you want to get a job, something like a secretary or something, if a boy, it will be quite difficult because a lot of graduates come out from school and they all want the same job, and they want to do it for a very low salary. They wouldn't mind, you know. So if you want to do some kind of job like us, it will be quite easy, but not too many girls would like to work in a bar naked in front of strangers, right?
It's very, very crowded, extremely, particularly that I have been living in Singapore for over a year. And people are far more friendly and polite over there than over here. Like, came back the first day, and I got all the hassle from the cab driver. They want to rip me off. And they try to get as much out of you as possible, something like $20.
Crime is a particular source of aggravation in Hong Kong. Car theft, burglary, and robbery with violence are rife. The problem is compounded by a universal public resentment of the police force. The average constable on the beat receives about $30 Australian a week, and corruption is widespread. A massive public relations campaign had to be mounted to persuade people to cooperate with the police by taking normal precautions and reporting crime. The arrest and conviction rate is still embarrassingly low, and the police have now adopted almost paramilitary tactics to fight the crime wave. Police cadets are trained in the Kung Fu style of Aikido, a bone-wrenching technique particularly geared to fighting armed opponents. But it's not surprising the crime rate is so high when so many of the Chinese people have been settled in conditions like these by men who have accommodation like this. Their main source of emotional release is going to a movie, particularly a Kung Fu movie, which they've raised to something of an art form, with a style and a set of traditions all of its own. The plots are simple The characterization is limited, to say the least. The main purpose of the exercise is continuous, spectacular action. Grant found watching the making of one of these pictures was almost as engrossing as seeing it on the screen.
That's the next one. You're still not going to say anything, right? Okay, you from there to there, and then he'll yell George. Let go as soon as he yells George. Okay? Got it. All right, come on. Right,
Raymond Chow's Golden Harvest Studios, who produced all the Bruce Lee films, have several of Asia's top martial artists under contract. Now, a foreign devil, like former James Bond George Lazenby, is currently filming his first kung fu movie. Grant asked him how he was getting on.
One of my first days here, I was running through a rehearsal and everything seemed fine. I had a few friends around from London that were talking to me in the background. Of course, my concentration wasn't total. I wandered off the set and back on, and I had to step back and dodge one blow, and then step to the side for the next one. And then another guy was coming across from this side, and I stepped back this way. Well, I forgot about that character, and I ducked instinctively, and got a full blast in the side of the head, so I spun around, and stars going everywhere, and that day was dangerous because I was half conscious all day long from that punch. It was under my hairline, but my head, you'll notice in the picture, was a bit higher on one side for about 3 days of filming until it settled itself down. It was lucky it wasn't my eye.
I think so. I got to get Chinese piles laying down here.
The Chinese were unsure at first how a Westerner would fit in with their brand of organized chaos, but George soon had a relaxed attitude to the eccentricities of Asian movie making.
Well, to me, one of the funniest things, I was reading through the script and I thought, now, here's a nice scene for me. I've got this beautiful Chinese lady who's going to lean over me naked and say, George, I love you, blah, 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 I want to make it with you, etc., or whatever they say in Chinese, and leans down and kisses me. When the scene came about, all that happened was they got the camera shooting from the middle of the back up from behind. She walks towards me, and it was hard to keep a straight face because she didn't want to walk around even with her back showing. They're very puritanical here. And so she had the front of her mask with masking tape right down to here and a newspaper right up the front. I mean, when you see that coming at you, what do you say? It looked like Ned Kelly without his mask on. I mean, it just turned me right off.
George plays an undercover agent, determined to smash an Asian drug syndicate. And in this scene, he's being tortured by the nasties.
Well, what you call being overloaded with Spanish fly being tortured. Well, I guess I'm being tortured, well. They're going to give me an injection with sex drug in there, a stimulant. And Mao Ying doesn't get it, because she fakes it with the pills under her tongue, you see. So I'm let loose on poor little Mao Ying, loaded to the eyeballs with a sex drive, you know, drugs that you can't control yourself. Should be a lot of fun.
All the action sequences are demonstrated first by the martial arts choreographer. Then the star runs through the movements, getting faster and faster each time, until the director is satisfied that he has achieved the required speed. Grant asked him if he'd learned anything from working on the film.
Well, the first thing I've learned is to be aware of every Chinese, because it's like anything. If you practice at it, you become good at it. And they got 2 arms and 2 legs the same as everybody else has, but the ordinary fellow in the street will throw a left or a right hook or something like that. But these guys will get you coming backwards, sideways, and then their feet are coming. They're like a spiked wheel coming at you. they'll get you eventually. You know, if this one don't get you, then the next one will, kind of thing. Well, it's just every way they're coming from. And every part of them's a lethal weapon. There's like 24 bits of my arm that I knew I couldn't hit with before, but I can now. And it doesn't hurt me. Just from hardening it up on bits of working it out. And these two muscles here are as good as those two knuckles there, you know what I mean? And some of the guys here, they can pick your nose with their toes, sort of thing.
The producer of the George Lazenby film is Andre Morgan, the only Western producer working for a Chinese movie company. He explained what he felt was the appeal of kung fu movies for Western audiences.
Something new, something different. Right now, things out of Asia are very faddish in the West. And I think it's probably the first time that Western audiences have been presented with fight sequences that are well choreographed, that take much longer to happen on the screen and at the same time have a certain artistic merit in the way that ballet has. It's something new and different that the Western audiences haven't seen before.
Andre was also a close personal friend of the man who brought kung fu to the West, Bruce Lee.
In terms of the way Bruce would fight in real life and the way he fought on the screen, there are obviously some differences. The adjustments that we make for all martial arts on camera. He had to slow down some of his actions, and some of his gestures had to be exaggerated in order for them to be caught by the camera. More than anything, he actually had to slow down. He had a tremendous speed in real life, but it was too fast for the camera.
He was a very strong person, you know, mentally strong. Anything he said, apart from the knowing that he could cut you down in 3 seconds flat with his physical powers. I mean, he was like a piece of wire. You know, a couple of times we were grappling together, or you're saying, this muscle's for this, you feel that, and you'd feel it, and it was like feeling a ball of steel when it was rolled up. And you just didn't want to tangle with it. But getting back to him, he had a lot of mental strength. He would concentrate on something, and you would have to concentrate. For instance, he'd have an idea for the picture, and he'd ring up 2 o'clock in the morning. George, are you there? George. Yes, Bruce. I've got this idea. What do you think of this? And he'd go on for an hour.
Lee's unfinished film, Exit the Dragon, contained perhaps some of his best work. A formidable array of ferocious opponents were assembled for him. They included 7'4" Harlem Globetrotter Raoul Jabbar. Golden Harvest intend to complete the film by the end of the year. Bruce Lee worked very hard to achieve the dexterity he shows on the screen. He had his own gymnasium, custom built to his own specifications. It was here he would work out for 2 hours every day, with weights and sophisticated equipment calculated precisely for the muscle groups he concentrated on. Movie martial artists have to train just as hard as if they were in competition to keep their audiences happy. And since Bruce Lee's death, several other kung fu killers have started to draw the crowds in Asia and America. Top of the list is 23-year-old Angela Mao. 5 feet 2 inches of kung fu dynamite, the fastest female fist in the East. She holds a black belt in the Korean martial art of Hapkido, and here she's fighting a Japanese karate expert.
from the female point of view, perhaps that women's lib is catching on in America, and they like to see that little 5'2" woman up there beating the daylights out of all these towering men.
Just keep trying.
She can whip the daylights out of 6 or 7 of them by herself. From the man's point of view, perhaps there's a masochistic tinge to it.
Then there's 33-year-old Wong Yu, a former swimming champion from Shanghai, and a multi-millionaire who doesn't have to work.
Wong Yu has always been ahead of the game. He's always been the actor in Hong Kong that has set the trend. It was Wong Yu that 6 years ago set the trend in swordplay movies. He was the first one-armed swordsman. And then about 3 years ago, he was the first known Chinese actor in Hong Kong to do away with the sword and go strictly to unarmed combat. He was the first martial arts actor in Hong Kong. His technique perhaps isn't as perfected as was Bruce Lee's, but in terms of all-round action, he's certainly Bruce Lee's equivalent.
Probably his most famous film is known in Asia as The One-Armed Boxer.
Well, he took on an array of opponents from around the world with only one arm, just as the title implies. He took on Okinawan karate experts. In fact, a real black belt 6 dan karate expert from Okinawa, 2 Thai boxers that we brought up from Bangkok, an Indian that we flew in from Delhi, and also 2 Tibetan monks, which I must admit were just stuntmen.
43-year-old Jun Rhee once trained CIA agents in Taekwondo, a Korean martial art that turns the feet into lethal weapons. Now he's a box office smash in When Taekwondo Strikes.
Jun's special strong points are his feet. He's tremendously fast with his feet. In fact, for a while, Bruce Lee studied with Jun Rhee, not under him, but in terms of exchanging ideas. Jun can jump up and kick 6 people before he comes back down.
One of the most promising of the younger martial artists is Carter Wong.
Carter Wong is a martial artist. He's not had that much experience on the screen yet, and so he's still learning the differences between real martial arts, which the object is to kill the opponent as quickly as possible, and martial arts for the cinema audience, which is slightly prolonged fights that are choreographed to look spectacular on the wide screen.
Andre suggested Grant should experience some of Carter's style at first hand. He arranged that the next day he would take part in 2 fight sequences. While Carter limbered up his way, Grant adopted less conventional methods of getting himself in full working order.
Could I have a tequila, please, baby? Listen, you were trying to teach us the other night. How do you drink this with one hand? Show me how. You mind? We'll finish up with a bit and finger.
Put a salt in here. Wet your hands first.
You've got to lick. I've got to lick my hand? Sure. Right. Now what?
What you do is suck a lemon. No, suck a lemon, lick the salt, and drink the tequila. Suck a lemon and lick the salt.
Okay, you're on. You ready?
Yeah. Great. That's good. You drink it in one go. Better have some orange to go with it. That's great. Beautiful.
Now I'm supposed to go out and fight Carter Wong? He's a big boy.
That's it.
Do you want to come up and help me fight him?
Those calluses aren't makeup, they're real. As Grant was about to find out, tequila and kung fu don't mix. For his next trick, Carter decided on a fight with weapons, his favorite being the Chinese fighting stick. Grant was armed with a grappling hook in one hand, a knuckle duster in the other, and a knife in his belt in reserve. Naturally, he didn't stand a chance. In this fight, Carter actually challenged Grant to try to hit him, to see if he, as a former Australian commando with a Western style of fighting, could get past an Eastern defense system. Guess what happened?
How did you get on the fight with Carter, Wong?
He made a mess of me.
What has he done? What has he done to you?
I can't really tell you all the injuries he gave me. The kung fu is incredible. It's so fast.
Do you know anything about it then?
I know a lot more about it now than I did yesterday.
Although Grant came close to starting a new career as Australia's oldest boy soprano, he suffered fewer bruises from Carter's fighting stick than he did from his fists. There are many other weapons Carter could have fought him with. A longer fighting stick, for instance, a dragon pole or quarterstaff. Bruce Lee was a master with this, as he was with many other weapons. Here, Lee is using twin fighting sticks. Note the grip, some way along the sticks with the thumb turned downward. The two-sectional staff, or nunchaku, was Lee's favorite weapon. He handled one or two of them with equal dexterity. It's best used against multiple attackers in a short-range situation. The Chinese model links twin bolts of wood or metal with a chain 6 inches long. The speed reached at the perimeter of the arc can go as high as 150 miles an hour. The Japanese version has only a 2-inch chain, but effectively, there's not a great deal of difference between being clobbered by a 70-mile-an-hour object or one traveling at 150.
Get him.
The three-sectional staff is a logical extension of the nunchaku. It is basically a stick that turns around corners. Folded up, it becomes a short club. Ripped in the shape of the letter U, it can be used as 2 fighting sticks with a built-in guard. Fully extended, it can be whirled in a circular fashion and keep a group of attackers at bay. It's certainly a hard one to parry, particularly if you've only got one arm. Chinese movies have some of the most spectacular swordplay you'll see on the screen. The swords are real, and the strategy is genuine. A good fighter uses what the Chinese call the chasing principle, a continuous barrage of circular movements working into his opponents and forcing them off balance. Any break in sequence will result in a loss of power and impact. The Japanese style favors the headlong rush. Brutally effective, but liable to leave small pockets of resistance behind. Consequently, the Japanese always lose in Chinese movies. One of the more unusual examples of Chinese weaponry are the twin fighting shields. Sharp-edged and pointed, they are offensive as well as defensive weapons. The Japanese evolved their version of the Roman gladiators' net and trident. Here, the steel ball and chain are used to ensnare the opponent, and the sickle finishes him off. Top swordsman Wong Yu devised this interesting counter-maneuver. This is, in fact, an example of a fundamental principle in Chinese fighting. By the use of rotary motion techniques, you can turn your opponent's weapon against himself. The Academy Award for rotary motion, if there was such a thing, would undoubtedly go to these gentlemen, whose balletic gyrations take their Japanese opponents totally by surprise. A vital element in the audience's enjoyment of a kung fu movie is the soundtrack. A glorious collage of gurgles, shrieks, thumps, and thwacks. In fact, no sound whatsoever is recorded during shooting. It is all post-synchronized later by a team of highly professional dubbers who contribute every single noise, from the leading man's big speech right down to the last death rattle. Grant Page spoke to one of the top dubbers in Hong Kong, Michael Ross.
Michael, you're the voice, I believe, we all hear when they say "Ka!" and all of the associated sounds.
Yes, that's right. Usually the movie is made with the actors themselves speaking Cantonese. This is then dubbed into Mandarin. Now, if that dubbing in the first place is good, then it makes our job much easier, because the format for the dubbing is such that we have the Mandarin soundtrack in our ear, and we have the screen in front of us, and the script also in front of us. Now, we're reading off the script, and we synchronize our voices to the voice coming through our ear, and occasionally, if we get the chance, we'll look up for an IQ. So if their dubbing's on, then our dubbing is generally done easier. The fight sequence is actually the easiest to dub, because it requires no real timing, except to synchronize wherever possible your voice to the actor's mouth. And when a guy's getting slugged in the guts, you make the suitable sound, like the guts would probably be, you know. And if he was hit on the head, ah, you know, and then you get guys, jumping off of mountains, and you usually fade away from them, you know. So there are definitely some people who die much better than others. Some people seem to have the knack. We have, well, in one of the dubbing teams here at Golden Harvest, there's maybe 2 or 3 prime dyers, and you know, you can, because honestly, some of the dying is at times melodramatic. You know, the guy will fall down, then he'll be on his feet again, he'll roll around, he'll fall down, you know, and it really drags it out, and you have to give all sort of blood-curdling, you know, and then they get their last word in, usually before the die, which is something like, "Don't forget to tell him."
Receive only $200 Australian per movie. Scriptwriters get about $850 a film, top directors $2,000, and many stars no more than $3,000. Despite a relatively low income when compared with that of a United States producer, Andre Morgan tackles the problems of his job with obvious relish.
Andre, with all of the different styles of martial arts in Asia, do you have much trouble if you want to choreograph a fight between 2 different styles of martial arts?
Well, sometimes we have as many as 4 or 5 translators standing around doing simultaneous translations. It's like the United Nations out here. We were doing Taekwondo Heroes. We were using Jun Ri, who was an American, Korean, and we were using 2 Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, and every time the director, who was Chinese, gave an instruction, we had 3 interpreters turning around and talking to their respective national groups. In fact, sometimes it got a little bit difficult. We got into more problems of custom and culture than we did into problems of language.
Yeah. You'd find a certain amount of competition between the different styles, each one thinking they were the better and therefore should win.
Well, when you're dealing with martial artists, you're always dealing with their ego as to exactly how good they are. And when they're pitted against other martial artists from various schools where the rating systems are different, there's always a chance that they'll want to try themselves out against somebody else.
Have you ever had that happen where you've found somebody just get completely carried away on the set?
As a matter of fact, it did. It happened on Taekwondo Heroes with Jun Rhee and a Japanese karate expert. He was black belt 4th Dan. And Jun Rhee's a Taekwondo black belt, I think it's 8th Dan. And we had one particular take in which they were pitted against each other. It was the grand finale fight at the end of the film. And the director called cut, and Jun Rhee froze in position. And the Japanese karate expert hauled off and punched Jun Rhee square in the stomach, driving him across the stage with his feet off the ground. Knocked Jun Rhee out. And of course, there was frantic calls for people to come up on the sound stage, and I went up there, and the Japanese is standing over in a corner with 2 other Japanese and a translator, and poor Jun Rhee's laying flaked out in a chair, being revived by a Chinese doctor. And I asked the Japanese what had happened, and he said it was a Japanese custom. And I said, what was a Japanese custom? And he said, to hit Koreans.
Certainly, the Kung Fu movie is not a one-day wonder. It has established itself as a class of filmmaking like the Western. More and more international companies are coming to Hong Kong to make their own kind of Eastern. One afternoon, Hammer Films of England took over the cocktail lounge of Grant's Hotel, while local Kung Fu star T. Lung demolished a half a dozen villains.
Like it.
Grant asked the star of the film, Stuart Whitman, how he found working on a Kung Fu movie.
It's a little confusing to me because once they hit a man, in American films, you hit a man, he goes down. Unless it's just a street fight and it goes on and on. But here you keep hitting the man, he keeps going up, you hit him again, he keeps going up and up and up. And that's a little disturbing to me, so I'm paying extra close attention to this fight that's going on right now.
Do you find much trouble adapting the Western style of fighting that you're so used to the Kung Fu style?
Well, no, not me personally, because I've studied karate and jiu-jitsu, and for the last couple of years I've been studying Hapkido, which is even quicker than this Gun Fu. It's a more deadly martial art. In Western, or the Queensberry of boxing, you know, it's block and then strike. This isn't with Hapkido. As you throw, and then I come in. I don't block, I just roll with it and come and strike. So, but it's very effective, I think.
Speed seems to be the main element. I find I had a certain amount of fighting with Carter Wong. I'm still suffering from the bruises.
Yeah, I am too. I've got a couple of blood, coagulation of blood deals, one right down in there. And I've got a couple of cracked ribs here that I picked up the other day, and this, the guy wasn't supposed to actually kick me, but he did.
George Lazenby had his share of close shaves.
I hate heights. I believe you're a height man. I don't like that. I mean, there's one scene in this movie where we had to climb up a cliff, and I was reading this in the script, and I said, oh, that's all right, I'll fake it with a back projection or something. You know, the day came, they drove me out to a cliff and put me on the bottom. They got on the top with the camera and said, come on, come on.
It's amazing how these directors tend to be a little bit callous about it.
Right, halfway along, and they say, now pretend you're slipping, you know.
Pretend nothing.
Right. Then they bowl a big boulder down and say, don't forget the duck on the way.
Bito.
Things like that, but yeah, they don't want to lose you as much as you don't want to lose yourself, although the stuntmen here are extraordinarily agile on their feet.
As a stuntman himself, Grant watched his Chinese counterparts with admiration for the expert way they handle so much potentially dangerous punishment. There's no way you can fake this sort of stuff. Every now and again, a stunt comes up that is outstanding in its own right, but is quite exceptional when you know that the star is actually doing the stunt himself. Here, James Tian continues to fight bare-chested with his clothes on fire. Wong Yu did all his own stunts in this incredible cable car fight. Against the express orders of the producer, he did that 200-foot dive himself, and seeing is believing. That Sunday, Grant decided to give his bruises a day off, do what 8,000 Chinese do every weekend. Take the hydrofoil to Portuguese Macau and gamble at one of their 6 casinos. The journey takes 75 minutes, and if you have any money left after buying your way out of the ever-changing immigration formalities, you can still lose it at the tables. Grant lost his at the floating Macau Palace, which operates around the clock. Every conceivable game is available in a variety of luxuriously styled casinos. The economy of the colony effectively depends on them, and there's little sign of anything else being built. This bridge has taken 7 years to get this far. 300,000 Chinese live here, governed by a handful of Portuguese civil servants. The People's Republic of China is not very far away, and their gunboats are always in evidence. The colony's total dependence on mainland China is even more blatant than in Hong Kong. Here, a communist tanker is supplying an empty Macau fuel depot. Drinking water and all fresh vegetables come courtesy of Peking. And red Chinese cigarettes sell well. The sizable floating population generally hold fishing licenses from both sides of the river, and some never set foot on Portuguese dry land, intermarrying only with people from other boats. Unlike Hong Kong, there is no serious crime here, and the tourist can blunder about anywhere in complete safety. From a cultural point of view, there is much to enjoy. At the Bishop's Palace, traditional Chinese cooking urns function as bells. The ruins of St. Paul's is probably the best example of the blend of medieval Europe and ancient China that characterizes the architecture of Macau. Built in 1602, the church caught fire during the typhoon in 1835, leaving only the facade, which still stands today. The light from the fire helped guide many people out of the flooded town to higher ground. Chinese history reads like a succession of spectacular adventure stories. The one-armed swordsman of movie fame did in fact exist, according to records, during the Han Dynasty around 200 BC. After observing the top exponents of Kung Fu for 10 days, Grant felt the time had come to see how their techniques related to his particular specialty, climbing. There's a cliff on the Kowloon side called Lion Rock. Every Chinese New Year, gangs of Hong Kong communists and the supporters of General Chiang Kai-shek fight over it for the right to raise their flag. It's also claimed the lives of several climbers. Grant decided to scale it, freehand, and rope slide off the top. Lion Rock is not a cliff you tackle without being absolutely sure of your equipment. The rope he had bought was normally used for mooring junks, so Grant had to find a means of checking it out under more controlled conditions. Chose a 200-foot-high retaining wall that was built to prop up a mountain spur and prevent landslides into Kowloon. Even so, it was not a face to inspire confidence. It was made of a crumbling sand mix that often disintegrated underfoot. The purpose of this climb and the subsequent run down was to test the rope for kinks. The lay of the rope strands must be totally even, and the diameter must be exact, as this is what controls the speed of the slide. A climb like this requires more than just well-developed biceps. Grant is, in fact, utilizing a muscle group that a kung fu exponent would use in combat. Stretching from the buttocks to the back of the knees is the main driving muscle of the body, known to the muscle-bound by the awesome title of the glutimus maximus. A martial artist develops it to improve his kicking. And it provides Grant Page with the power to walk up that wall. Everything has to be constant to establish timing and judgment. If the carabiner hits a kink when he's sliding at 20 miles an hour, the jolt could break his back. So, a headlong run down this wall at 10 miles an hour, taking the rope through the carabiner, should remove any kinks. This is not dangerous, providing he doesn't lose his grip on the rope. So far, so good. While friends carried the rope to the top of the cliff the easy way, Grant took a more direct route. The key to success in free climbing or kung fu or probably any physical endeavor is to maintain rigid control over your own center of gravity. Never strain for that extra inch beyond balance. A climber never knows, till he's actually on the face itself, what route he will eventually take to the top. It's largely a matter of trial and error. Though perhaps that's not the best way of putting it, because error means a fall. Quite often, Grant found himself on a crevice or a ledge that just petered out. He had to retrace his steps and try another route. The face of Lion Rock looks deceptively craggy, but it is, in fact, largely composed of crumbling sandstone. And this is what has caused the accidents. Footholds suddenly give way. But anything's possible, if you're careful. If you thoroughly test every surface before giving it your unsecured weight. The height of a climb never bothers Grant. It has nothing to do with courage or foolhardiness. It's a question of mental attitude. He feels you can be killed just as easily by falling 50 feet as 500, so why worry? Just don't fall off. Once on top, Grant rigged the slide rope and prepared to take off. All that's going to be between him and terminal velocity is a piece of carpet. So there's no room for error. Grant finds rope sliding a wonderfully exhilarating sensation. it's a great way to conquer a mountain.
That's what you normally use for hardening everything up.
Once back in Sydney, Grant visited Lawrence Lee at his Kung Fu school.
And what did you learn up in Hong Kong?
Well, Lawrence, everything that I sort of learn, I compare to my own thing, which is climbing, and the most noticeable thing to me was the terrific control of the Kung Fu exponents. They've got a cat-like sense of balance. I've seen somebody stand on their foot. I've seen you do it. Stand on one foot with their whole body and their legs right up off the ground and have 3 separate kicks at an object. And it's the same feeling you get on a cliff face where you've got to be balanced on one point and you're reaching for something else, you've got a counter on the other side. If you go 1 inch too far, you'll fall off. It's the same thing with Kung Fu. If you've got a grip on a cliff face and you can feel through your own knowledge of your own body, which you exponents know as well, the degree of slip, then if you reach a fraction too far, your hand will slip. If you don't know yourself well enough, you don't know your own body workings well enough, then you won't be able to go right to that limit. If you're a good climber, it's the same thing, you go right to your limit. You can, say, kick a fly off somebody's shoulder because you know exactly the feeling of the balance and you sight it all up beforehand.
The first job Grant's agent got him, ironically, turned out to be playing a human punching bag for Lady Kung Fu herself, Angela Mao, who was in Sydney on a promotional tour. Grant was to be pummeled to pieces for the benefit of the press on the steps of the Opera House.
Move your leg back, Grant, and then she's got room to come in for the second one. No, on the second one. See, she kicks you the first time, then you step back and she'll do the second one. Yeah. 没有关系，其他的没有关系的。有在这边用手还有用，他的没有关系啊。好了
Right? Okay, good.
You come in. One more. 再一次，再一次。
Frightened of her.
他已经
I'm terrified of her.
所以我这个忘穿帮你打在这里的，看不来的不会穿。
You know what would happen if that hit there?
看不来这个多死点了。不会打到他的电影上。
Don't worry, she won't hit you in the nose.
I don't want to open my eyes. I don't want to know what's happening. I don't want to be here.
你要塞进胃，肚子会。
The first one you hear.
这样。Do it again. Come again.
Hey, now wait a minute. Just get a timer. Can you turn her off?
There.
Oh!
There's more to Kung Fu than publicity stunts. Its current commercial success has probably obscured some of the finer points. And the Western mind is not yet fully attuned to one of its fascinating contradictions, namely strength, peace of mind, and a love of life through the apparent study of violence. Grant Page will certainly be studying it more.